Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to be reviewing the Melbourne Tool Company Cabinet Scraper. Hope you enjoy. First of all, I purchased the cabinet scraper with my own money. I actually already had it when I bought the complete kit, and you'll see that video when I unboxed it. I'll leave it down below. I ended up with a second one, so yeah, I do have two of them, even though I don't really need two of them, but I'm going to be going through, and it gives me a good chance to show you how flat the sole is on these when you first get them, and how easy it is to turn that curl initially on them. What this particular cabinet scraper is the Melbourne Tool Company's version of the Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper. It is a very basic design, just like the Stanley design, just like all the reproductions. It's a very, very basic design. So let's jump in here and we'll have a close look. So as I said, we have this very basic one-piece cast steel construction. We have these cork inlays here. Now, I was a little bit worried about the cork when I first saw them, but I've been using this one quite consistently and I've had no issues with that cork falling out. We have a screw on the back here which is used for flexing and changing how aggressive the actual scraper in these is. And then we have a very basic just metal bar held on here, and they've got screw slots in here for a screwdriver because these can get quite tight when you add pressure to them and they're difficult to undo. And then you just slide the basic scraper out. Reversible scraper here, so we have a bevel on the top and on the bottom, which means we can reverse it. Currently you can see on this one I've flattened the bottom of this, but I haven't flattened this side because I just keep using the same side, but you can do both. And one other thing this screw on the back achieves is actually making the scraper more aggressive, as I said, and it does that by when we add pressure and it flexes the scraper, it actually protrudes it out from the mouth on the sole of this a little bit more, so the more it flexes, the more of the scraper is exposed to the timber in operation. So now we've covered what it's made of, let's jump in and we'll have a look at this brand new one that I've not used. We'll see how flat the sole is and how flat the back of this scraper is, and then we'll roll a quick burr and we'll take a few shavings and I'll show you how well it works after you've got a decent burr on there. So I've got my usual flattening setup, which is a piece of MDF, which is machined dead flat as they are. Then we've got sandpaper on top, held on my flat workbench. You can use whatever substrate you want here. You can use granite substrate or float glass, but you've got to make sure it's float glass. Normal plate glass is actually not flat, but float glass is floated using gravity to keep it flat. Now, the reason I use this is that glass is actually a liquid and continues to move, so over time float glass will go out of flat, so that's just something to bear in mind. So this does look like it has some sort of inhibiting film on it, but when we put it through with the sandpaper it's going to remove that, so we don't really need to remove any film. All we've just got to make sure is that that scraper, and I do need to adjust it a little bit, is actually sitting back up into the mouth because we don't want to damage that scraper, so I'm just going to push that in a little bit, do it up. Technically you could take it out on this, there's no real reason to leave it there, but since it is, we'll just leave it there. So putting your weight down here, and that's already come up dead flat, so we know that that was dead flat to start with. You could put this on some finer sandpaper if you want, but really what you see there is fine. There's no real reason to do anything more to that. So I've now taken the blade out and we can see just here, or I hope you can see, there's oil on the surface. So what I'm going to do is wipe that off because I don't want to get that on my diamond stones. So we'll wipe that excess off, and since I use automotive Windex or window cleaner as the lapping fluid on my diamond stones, I'm just going to use that and give it a final clean just to make sure there's nothing on it, and we'll give it a quick oil up after we're done. The way we sharpen these is that you've got to sharpen, obviously the back needs to be flat, and you also want to sharpen this angle. They're different from a card scraper which has square. These style in both the cabinet scraper and a scraper plane have a bevel here. Now that bevel angle doesn't really matter as long as it meets that edge. So all it is the thickness is here is to keep it more solid so it doesn't vibrate, but then we thin it out because we need a thin point or a straight edge to curl that burr on, and so that's why they have these. So let's see how flat this is to start with. Now, it doesn't really matter, you kind of just want to come in halfway, especially if you're doing both sides. In this case, I'm just going to do the one side. Now, this is my 400 grit diamond stone. So what I'm going to do, since I don't think you can see that here, I'm just going to mark where we remove material. So inside here is where we flattened it out, here we didn't. So since I'm only going to do it on one side, as I said, let's just flip over and see if the other side is flat. Once again, I'm just going to mark this. So the outside of that line is what flattened here, and so we actually have a hollow on this side and a hump on this side, which I suppose is to be expected. If it's hollow on one side, it's going to be humped on the other side. So that's a trade-off when you work with these sort of blades. If it's hollow one side, it's going to be on the other side, especially when you're using both. So I would just choose that flat side and run with that. So now we're going to flatten that bevel edge, and to do this, we're going to put more lapping fluid than you normally would, and you might be able to get this to fit into the Veritas jig, and I think this one actually does fit, but you're not going to be able to match any angle with it because it's not going to protrude out enough, if I recall correctly. So what we're going to do, and since this angle doesn't matter so much, we just need it flat with that back area, we're going to put a lot of lapping fluid, and you can see here when I'm moving all the lapping fluid in front, that means that I've matched the angle. And it's very hard to hold this angle. But just do your best. So you can see that I've floated around on the angle a little bit, but I do have a burr, a consistent burr all the way along the back. So now we're going to come in onto the lower stone. Going to remove that burr and also just continually flatten this, and then we're going to move on here. So going to do that same sharpen on my next grit, which happens to be 800 or approximately 800. So we're going to push that fluid in front, and the reason I removed the burr is that you'll know when you've actually got there, because you'll feel a burr across the whole thing. So I still haven't quite got to the outside edge. Now, when you're doing these, you don't necessarily need to have the burr all the way along. The middle sort of third of it is really the only spot that it needs to be done, because when you actually flex it, these corners never engage. It flexes and it pulls those corners out, which is why scraper or cabinet scrapers like this don't leave plain tracks. It's because you flex it, it pulls the corners out as it's flexed, and so you never actually get the same sort of tram tracks that you would, or plane tracks that you get with a hand plane. So now I feel that across the whole thing. And now onto the fine stone, which is a 1200. I've got a burr again. Let's get rid of that. So that there's no burr on this flat edge. If it comes up onto the bevel, that doesn't matter, because as we use the burnisher across that, that's going to disappear. So you can see with very little effort, I've managed to flatten along that bevel, flatten the back. I'm not going to the strop with this. There's no real point. It doesn't really have any advantage when it comes to a scraper in any form, to be honest, to actually use a strop. So 1200 grit is more than enough. Some people just sharpen these very roughly just using a file, so that's another option, but to be honest, you really want a consolidated burr. So let's just jump over here. I'll grab my burnisher. So the first step in this is to hang it off the edge, and you actually want to run on that flat edge back and forwards 10 or so times. Now this is just consolidating the edge of the steel, and then on your angle you actually want to do the same thing here. And so what that's done is consolidated the steel. It kind of pushes it back into itself, and you actually end up with a stronger burr in the long run. Some people say that that's not the case, but in my experience, that's exactly what happens. You can use your vise, but really one of these wooden screw clamps is actually the best way to do it that I've found. Because you can just clamp it in and you can sit it up quite high, and so you can still get in here with your burnisher. We essentially want to match the angle that we've got here, and then you want to add no more than 5 degrees on top of that, so it's just sort of a little tip. So we go back and then just slowly tip it a little bit off. That's actually pretty quick and easy to actually turn a burr on. So let's throw it into the scraper and take it to a piece of wood and see how well we went. To install these in here, it couldn't be any easier, to be honest. You kind of want to protect the burr, but if you've got a burr on both sides, you can't really, so you just want to gently bring it in from the bottom like this. Make sure everything's nice and loose. Bring it through, and then just sit it on a block right in the middle, and then do these up hand tight. Bring that screw up, give it a little turn, and that's put tension on it, and now it won't fall out. We're good and set, and it should be coming out on the bottom as we turn the screw. So we're taking almost like powder here, so I'm going to turn the screw on the back 1/4 of a turn. So you can see now we're actually pulling a shaving because it's been turned enough to allow it to actually get out past the base or the bottom here. And we can see that we're getting some very, very fine shavings here. If we turn this another, probably about 1/4 of a turn there. It's much harder for me to push this because we're taking a much heavier shaving. You can see these are much thicker, so you can actually take some very thick shavings. So there's one thing we can do, as usual, lubricate the sole, which is going to make it easier when we're taking those very heavy sort of scrapings, which this does do pretty well. You can sort of interchange a scraper with a hand plane when you've got reversing grain, and you can get pretty good results. And you can see how much easier that is with it lubricated. And we're taking a heavy shaving. I can go even heavier. And you'll see the shavings, if I stop here, that it's sort of coming out of the middle of the scraper right here, as I was mentioning to you. And with it lubricated, we can go even heavier. And very, very fine, as you saw before. with the cabinet scraper you're not going to get is those very, very, very fine shavings that you get with a card scraper. This is sort of a middle range, still surface prep, but it does still leave it pretty smooth to the touch, to be honest. But it's not going to be that glossy smooth surface that you can get with a card scraper. So there you have it, folks. That is my review of the Melbourne Tool Company Cabinet Scraper based on the Stanley number 80 design. And to be honest, at a price point of only $99 AUD, you really can't go wrong with one of these. I've seen vintage ones that are more expensive than these, and I can't fault these at all. So I really do think if you're in the market for one of these and you can't find a vintage one that you're after at a reasonable price, go ahead and get one of these. You're really not going to be disappointed. So do sound off in the comments if you've had a cabinet scraper, or if you've got any other questions related to the cabinet scraper. And if you'd like to see another video such as the one you've seen here today, do check out the playlist up here where I go through all the different types of scrapers. I've got a few different videos, including a dedicated one on this, so do look for those videos up there. Bye for now.